say welcome. Welcome to Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. Race Talk Revolution is where your voice matters. Today, we are wrapping up our 8-session series of Race Talk Revolution with a discussion about the healing power of empathy, curiosity, and resilience. Leading the conversation today will be Mr. Patrick O'Connor, award-winning producer, director of the film Look Away, Look Away, a documentary about a flag and a reckoning in Mississippi. And then joining Patrick is the outreach and engagement design team of Leslie Eades and Matt Wagner. Look Away chronicles Mississippians' struggle to find common ground as other states removed Confederate symbols from public spaces following the murder of 9 African-American men at Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina by self-described white supremacist Dylann Roof in 2015. Now, as usual, we invite you to bring your heart and mind to this conversation for elevating the social conscious and moving humanity forward. Our speakers will let you know how to participate to get the most out of today's conversation. And we also want to remind you that Race Talk is a loving, inclusive platform designed to strip away the false beliefs that keep us separated as a species, to uncover the not so hidden truth that we all really do want the same things in life, and to heal the wounds created by systemic racism. Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and explore the nuances of systemic racism, while together we are growing our capacity for effective anti-racist activism. The Race Talk Revolution community is committed to practicing radically inclusive love, which means though you may not understand or agree with what's being shared or said, we ask that you listen with respect, you listen with appreciation and empathy. You see, it is our commitment that every person be encouraged, every person be heard, and every person be appreciated, because here on Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. And here's my co-host, the Reverend Lane Cobb.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first timers and to our speakers today. I'm going to read their bios, and then we're going to get going with this wonderful conversation. So Patrick O'Connor is an award-winning writer-director whose recent film, Look Away, Look Away, won the 2021 Eric Barno Award for Outstanding Documentary from the Organization of American Historians, as well as the Audience Choice Awards for Best Film and Best Documentary at the 2021 Oxford Film Festival. His previous film, The Invisible Patients, had its national PBS broadcast premiere on America Reframed in 2018. The film also screened at the Heartland, Cucaloris, Chicago International Social Change, and Indie Film Festivals, as well as at dozens of universities and national conferences on bioethics and healthcare. He lives in Pass Christian, Mississippi, with his wife, the writer Margaret McMullen. Leslie Eades and Matt Wagner make up the Outreach, Engagement, and Design team. Based in Southern Indiana and living a mobile lifestyle in a van named Luna, Matt and Leslie are work and life partners who run a platform called Elemental, where they serve as facilitators, coaches, and creators that work with people and organizations to reconnect to and express their true elemental nature. Their vocational journey to this time has created experience in the areas of outreach and engagement, marketing, branding, and design, community development, hospitality, and gathering. They have served as ambassadors and outreach for their hometown city brand, E is for Everyone, speaker, curators, and coaches for TEDx Evansville, and co-creators of Heard, a local open mic speaker series designed as a safe space for people to be seen and heard in a community with one another. Leslie's values are courage and self-discipline. Matt's are accountability and adaptability. Together, their values are love and vision. and they work and serve for sustainability and justice. They believe the world is a more just and sustainable place where all people are seen and heard, and work to live by example as an embodiment of transformation and healing as they've embarked on their own personal journeys of physical, emotional, and spiritual transformation through entrepreneurship, community, and relationship. Welcome to you all. So happy that
you're having us.
Certainly. So Patrick, I'd like to open by asking you, please. This movie includes some very graphic images, and I know that you are quite passionate about feelings that you needed to make it. The images can be quite triggering, and you really do cover some very difficult issues. What was your motivation for making this film, and maybe what were some of the challenges?
In terms of motivation, I think it has to sort of do with who maybe I am as a person, sort of my genetic, my DNA. I'm very curious about things. I like to try to understand things. I also kind of think of myself as a storyteller, and all of those different elements sort of led me into being a documentary filmmaker. And everything that I sort of approach, there's an element of curiosity to it that sort of attracts me to a story. And in this particular case, part of it has to do with timing. I was married in Mississippi roughly 30 years ago, and have spent a lot of time in the state. But late in 2015, my wife and I moved down here permanently. And as you said in the introduction, 2015 was the year that Dylann Roof murdered those African-American folks in the church in South Carolina. And what was happening around here around that time, as Confederate symbols were sort of being taken down all throughout the South, here in Mississippi, I was seeing these two very active sides sort of bubble up. There were groups of people who were rallying to keep the current state flag, and there were groups of people who were rallying to remove the flag. And as I watched this sort of fight begin, I thought that it was just the kind of thing that could make a great documentary. It's something that should be documented. And my approach to it, after a lot of thought, was that I thought the most valuable way and the most interesting film would be to try to capture both sides of that debate and both sides of that argument. I think it would have been an easier film to make if I had just sort of picked one side and stuck with them. Because one of the biggest challenges, almost emotionally as well as like physically moving around the state, was that I was trying to go back and forth between both sides. And that would happen in a matter of a day. In one afternoon, I would be at a pro-Confederate heritage rally in a place like Tupelo. And then maybe that night or the next morning, I'd be shooting a group of people with a completely opposite perspective, say in Jackson or here on the Gulf Coast, who were trying to remove the flag. And that was sort of tough emotionally to kind of keep going back and forth around that. But the idea was to try to capture what was going to be, I think, a historical moment where the last state flag of the original Confederate states, the state flag of Mississippi, was the last to have that banner in it, was either going to come down or it was going to stay up. And I thought I was in a good position to try to capture what happened. I thought it would take a year or two. It ended up taking close to 5 years. But that was the impulse to make the film. And I can talk more about the challenges as we have this conversation, but that's the genesis of the film.
And we have some folks probably here today who have not watched the film, and so Leslie and Matt and Patrick encourage us as we're having this conversation today to also ask questions about the film of our own, and we will get to that as we always do. Just want you to know, if you have not seen the film, you can feel free to ask for some background. Leslie and Matt, I really want to acknowledge you again for that wonderful job you did putting together the conversation guide that accompanies this film. I mean, if for folks who haven't done that already, when I sent out the link for the film, it included a link to the conversation guide. I encourage anyone who has not done so to download that conversation guide after the broadcast, because there's so much wonderful information in it. We don't have time to go over all of it today. But you all should know that it also has information how you could lead your own courageous conversation about this film if you want to. So I want to encourage folks to access that after the broadcast, and we'll put the link back in the chat by the end of the session. Leslie and Matt, what is your role in this collaboration with Patrick? And what are your objectives for leading these conversations around this film?
Yeah, thank you. So our role in this season of the film, and I think that we started collaborating on outreach about a year ago, was to work together to define what Pat's impact was going to be with Look Away, whenever it reached audiences. And so what we really did was implement a process of having conversations to determine what success looked like for the film. So we had a series of 3 conversations where we talked about success and vision for what that would look like. And we actually pulled up all of our notes from those conversations over the last couple of days. So that was really exciting to go back and refresh on everything. The second conversation was developing strategy and impact dynamics. And then the third conversation was talking about deliverables and how we put all that into action. So going through a process that Matt and I usually do with other clients when we're talking about purpose and healing, looking at what success is in relation to whatever the work is at hand is so important in being able to create these spaces for conversation. One of the things that evolved from those conversations was the conversation guide and the gathering guide, because we realized that this film was going to activate people in different ways at different times for very different reasons. And that was important to acknowledge whenever we were going to share it with the world and to share it with you all, even during this last couple of weeks. And, once we determined what success was, which was creating these spaces and creating space for people to see and hear one another, for people to watch the film and be able to question how they see symbols, how they see other people, how they react to other people when they don't agree with you, and to be willing and open to changing how you interact with not only other people, but yourself in the world. And so that was our role to start. And since we've been, working on outreach with different audiences and facilitating these conversations and being in conversation with people. Mm-hmm. So do you have anything else to
Yeah, and just in speaking about the conversation guide, we believe that clarity is kindness, and clarity doesn't mean that we've created a lot of definitions in this gathering, or in this conversation guide, to not in order to control the definition of a word for the for the eternity, but to state clearly like what our intentions are, like with the discussion guide. And we want to create a space to center the core understandings of the film, which we defined it in 3 ways: is that 2 things can be true at one time, or multiple things can be true at one time, that curiosity is vital to connection, and that injustice shapes our perspective, right? And so we wanted to be able to center those conversations and provide people with the tools, that we've learned along the way to share, in those tools that we learned from our mentors and that we practice every day in having difficult conversations. So some kind of a structure and clarity and framework around the intent of the film, and try not to leave that ambiguous. Yeah.
If I can add to that, what Matt and Leslie have brought to this has been really, really valuable, because I know, as the filmmaker who made this thing, I know just how difficult it is. When I was making it, I had this idea in my head that by trying to get some clarity on what both sides of this argument, what they were talking about, I envisioned a time when the film was done, that people from both sides could sit in an audience, watch the film together, and understand what the other side, you could try to empathize with them, to have more clarity about what the other side thought. And that actually, we were able to have that happen when we premiered the film at the Oxford Film Festival in Mississippi a little over a year ago, we invited the main participants and everybody else who was in the film to watch the film together with an audience. So we had in an audience Sharon Brown and George Johnson and Greg Stewart. And I was petrified of this because these folks had never met each other.
And those were people that were featured in the film, right? For people who haven't, from opposite sides of this issue.
Yeah, so these are people who had been working for all these years trying to change the flag, and people who had worked all these years trying to keep the flag. They'd never met. I knew them all very, very well. I'd spend hours, countless hours with all of these folks, and would consider them friends, which is another challenge because I got to know these people very well, and they did not like each other. I mean, they'd never met, but they were just, they just didn't like each other. And that was tough for me because you want your friends to like each other. But when we screened the film, the most heartening part of it was that when these folks got together, they hugged.
And that moves you still, doesn't it?
It does. But my original point was that I've always struggled with how are we going to get people who are so diametrically opposed in how they feel about these things. How are we going to get them to try to understand each other? And one way was to have this screening and have them share the experience of watching each other on screen. But the other component of it is what Matt and Leslie are doing. They are trying to, what they're doing is framing this process in a way that encourages you to understand the people you disagree with.
And if I might say to you, I think
and that's not easy to do.
No, and it's hard to hate someone close up. And when we say close up, and I think Pat's demonstrating that it's not just close up like physically close up like in someone's face, but like that closeness to where you can sense the humanity in another person, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, but you can sense their fear, you can sense their vulnerability, you can sense like the humanity, the heartbeat, the soul flowing through another person. And I think that happened in that room that day, because it was absolutely terrifying. we didn't even know, even going in, how hard it was going to be until you're sitting in that room, and the electricity in the room was visceral for everyone, I think. Yeah.
So for this particular film, especially the work that they're doing in trying to find a way to create context for it and some sort of instruction in how to watch the film is useful, because it's like you've said, it's a tough film. I sometimes feel like I've dropped a bomb into a room, and it's like, okay, you guys go deal with the fallout of all of these conflicting emotions and feelings. But what they're doing is helping to create a way to watch the film that is more productive, maybe is the way to put it.
Oh, I love it. You're demonstrating the meaning of courageous conversation. I mean, right? Yeah, truly courageous, wonderful, good work, and how effective it is, right? So I'm going to turn the floor over to the three of you to lead this conversation. Please feel free to give us as much background as you like and as much direction, how we should listen, how you'd like us to participate. I know you want to start with a meditation. I wanted to let you know that I did put in the chat the three premise grounding points that you listed about the film. Two things can be true at one time. Curiosity is vital, and injustice centers our perception. So if you need to talk more about those also, please do that. The floor is yours.
And we do want to invite everyone to think about questions to ask us. We're in a lot of ways here and to serve, your audience. And so be thinking about that, and even post questions in the chat. We can center those questions. If not, we have some things that we can discuss, but we are here to hopefully talk through questions that you might have, or behind the scenes information. But we do want to acknowledge the weight of this conversation, and the weight of this film, and the way that we experience it in our physical bodies. I'm experiencing it right now, since we're already sort of into the conversation. I'm feeling, the heaviness and the weight of this conversation. I'm consoled looking at the faces, some of the familiar faces that we've seen in some of the other episodes. And we just want to start with just a very brief centering meditation. Lane and Eugene both say there's no revolution without love. So we want to start by expressing our love and our gratitude for everyone who showed up here today. We love you, and we look to be in community and communion with you today. We're going to go through just a really brief guided meditation so we can center our nervous system and be together and feel the connection. So Leslie, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you again, Lane and Eugene and everyone for being here. So let's all start by closing our eyes. And if you'd prefer to keep your eyes open, find something to steady your gaze on. It could be the screen, an object in the room that you're in. If you're in your car, looking straight ahead. And begin to notice your breath. Just simply breathing in and out. And slowly begin to notice the weight of your body wherever you're sitting, wherever you are. Knowing that we're all in different places, but in this space together. And let's take 3 breaths together. Let's inhale. And exhale. And inhale. And exhale. One more. Inhale. And exhale. We'll have a reading, some words to ground us as we go through this conversation, so that we can come back to this feeling of groundedness, of gratitude for ourselves, within ourselves, so we can be in conversation with others.
And these are the words of Pema Chodron, the Buddhist philosopher and teacher. May everyone enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. May we be free from suffering and the root of suffering. May we not be separated from the great happiness devoid of suffering. And may we all dwell in equanimity, free from passion, aggression, and prejudice.
And with your eyes still closed or your gaze still steady, let's take 3 more breaths together. Let's inhale and exhale. Let's inhale and exhale. One more. Inhale and exhale. Slowly begin to open your eyes and kind of move around in your seat. And we invite you throughout this conversation to come back to breath. If you need to take a moment, turn your camera off, take 3 breaths on your own, please do. And just a reminder to come back to breath in conversation to help ground and be with yourself and be with others. Thank you all for allowing us to lead you in this and for being here. I know there was one thing that I wanted to revisit with regards to the conversations we had about success for what outreach looked like for the film, to share that with you and to give a little more context about even the things that we had discussed in coming to what that answer was. So for success, we examined things such as making concrete change, viewer size, so a small audience versus a large audience, if that was something that we wanted to focus on, impacting lives, so creating impact and personally affecting people, achieving wide theatrical distribution, future opportunities, so opportunities to make a follow-up film or a second film, financial opportunities, acknowledgement via festivals, awards, humanness, which is the conversation, presentation, and then philosophy and mentorship. So those are all the things that we went through one by one and talked about how and if they would be one of the drivers for the outreach of Look Away, Look Away. And what we ended up determining was that a lot of these things would be byproducts of having these conversations and creating the safe spaces. So in our final assessment, we had a paragraph that we'd written about what that success looked like. So I'll go ahead and read that real quick before we transition into anything else that Pat, you or Matt would like to say, and then asking you all some questions. So success for Look Away looks like sharing the truths that encapsulate the facts about the legacy of the Mississippi flag and communicating the complex nature of the behind-the-scenes struggles that have taken place over the embedded symbolism of the Confederacy. We use the word truth in plural because everyone has a unique version of the truth based on their individual life experience and the experience of their ancestors. Proving empathy can be achieved through seeing and hearing each other. In sharing these truths, the film utilizes the concept of parallax, which is an effect by which the same object appears different when viewed from a different angle or perspective. Through parallax, we show that historical facts can be separate from individual truths, and that by being more open to people's truths through listening actively, we can live a life of curiosity and accept these contradictions.
Oh, thank you, Lane, for centering parallax.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are looking in the chat, and thank you for putting questions in the chat. And we do have a question by Saya. Do you feel that each person interviewed was in touch with their own real reasoning? Pat, how do you feel about that?
In touch with their own real reasoning. Can the individual ask that question, clarify the question a little bit, if you don't mind, just so I understand correctly what you mean?
I would say they're authentic feelings for the position they were taking.
Okay, I'm not sure I heard the first part of that. So were they authentic? Do I feel like they were authentic feelings?
Yeah, did they really go deep within themselves, or were they using more of the community or their own group, whatever that is?
I think I understand the question, and I think in some cases, and I am careful about trying to make assumptions about what someone thinks or why they think or how deeply they feel about something. I did notice in several cases where there was almost like a bullet point list of why the Confederate flag is not a symbol of hate, and you would hear the bullet points. But from my perspective, most of the people I spent a lot of time with in the film, I think they have examined their feelings, pretty thoroughly. Now whether or not it's thoroughly enough for everybody else, I don't know, but I think these are authentic feelings, and a lot of it comes from, I think, this, and I don't know if it's necessarily a Southern thing, but there's with most of these folks, there's a very, very strong connection to their ancestry. I heard that over and over and over again. To a person, they could tell me how many generations back a particular ancestor did what, where they fought, what their life situation was, and I don't see any value in questioning whether or not they really believe that or have that feeling. So I think that the short answer is, I think they're authentic feelings, or their positions come from authentic life experiences.
And also myself, having met a few of these people and watched the film a lot of times and thought a lot about it, I think that everyone's feelings are authentic to their experience. But where I think the disconnect can be sometimes is when they aren't recognizing someone else's feelings or dehumanizing the person who has the opposing feelings. And I think that might be the hang up. And when you're watching the film and there's scenes where George, who's one of who wants to keep the flag and is very adamant about that, is trying to protect a monument, and he is being overcome with real authentic emotion, it's hard to deny his humanity in that moment. When you're looking at that, it's hard to defend his position, but it's not hard to see his humanity. And he talks a lot about ancestors. And I think, there's another moment there's a lot of parallel moments where people I hesitate to say both sides, but on all sides of the debate do talk about their ancestors. And there's this parallel line of honoring your ancestors where there could be some common ground of coming together and seeing on the other side that this person is trying to honor their ancestors. There's another beautiful moment in the film where Sharon Brown, who wants to see change in the flag, witnesses the people that are involved in her organization burning the flag, the Confederate flag, and she pulls herself to the side and walks away and has to take a moment where this is a woman who has experienced all manner of injustice in her life, and she was able to find it in herself to say, I don't like to see that flag burned because I understand, what it means to them, even though I don't understand it, and I think that there's deep conflict, in those moments, internal conflict and external conflict. And so, yeah. So Greg is asking, beyond gaining increased empathy, did you see any persons changing their strongly held position as a result of your film?
Yeah.
Pat, you want to take that?
I was thinking about that this morning, and I thought when I began making the film, I thought that part of what would happen was that somebody would change their position. And that's, in terms of, making narrative and making film, stories are about change, and nobody changed their position. I think there was some nuance, like Matt just mentioned. Sharon, in that moment at the end of the film, if you've seen it, towards the end of the film, she kind of surprises us with the way she reacts to seeing the Confederate and the Mississippi state flag burning. But the answer to the question was, nobody in the course of making the film changed their position, which I think, I don't know if that surprised me or not, but it was something I was always kind of had my radar up for. And I would, sometimes when I would revisit the people I was interviewing, I would sort of check their temperature if something's changed, and it never really happened. And in fact, in most cases, as time went on, people became more dug in and more adamant that they were right, and that either the flag had to stay or the flag had to come down. So there was definitely a heel digging in sense that I got making the film. And I'm not sure what that says about people.
Well, and Leah in the film, who is pro changing the flag, makes a comment as she's watching videos of hateful videos of KKK and a lot of these videos on screen, and she says, I'm not here to change the minds of the folks of the KKK. I'm not here to change the minds. I'm here to change the minds of just regular people who may not understand, who may not know, may not be connected to this. And I think, in the process of having the film, the folks that are in the film are very much entrenched, right, Pat, like in their places. But there's the broader audience in this conversation of people that are new to this, that there's room for movement there.
Yeah, and I'll back up and answer that a little bit different way. The activists that I was spending the most time with, their positions never changed. But I think, the sort of the average Mississippian, I think, maybe moved probably towards flag change over the course of that 5 years. Every now and then there'd be a poll out and it would say, in 2015, it was, 40% wanted to change the flag, 60% wanted to keep it. And those numbers changed a little bit. But I'll tell a really quick story about somebody who's not in the film, whose position changed. And he's a contractor who was helping to build this office I'm working in right now. We were editing and making the film and editing the film while they were still finishing up. And so he was in here and saw a bunch of the footage. And at one point said, Pat, what is this you're working on? And I explained to him that it was about the Mississippi state flag. And this is a white gentleman who's probably 55 years old. He's a pastor in his own church here in Mississippi. And he said to me, I just don't understand why people think that flag needs to change. It's just about our heritage. And I took that opportunity to say, well, there's a different position here. And, the folks who say that the flag is really a symbol of slavery have a point. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, and I showed him a photocopy of Mississippi's Declaration of Succession. And if you've seen the film, it's brought up in the film, Mississippi, all the states that seceded had a declaration of why they were seceding. And in the second sentence of Mississippi's, it says, we are seceding because we want to preserve slavery, in so many words. And I showed him that, and he looked at it and said, you're kidding me. He never knew that. He'd never heard that. He spent his entire life in Mississippi. He'd never heard that Mississippi's official reason for entering or for seceding from the Union and joining the Confederacy was to preserve slavery. And he said to me, he may have come back like the next day and said, I'm going to be preaching at my church on Sunday, and I'm going to tell them all this, and we are not going to fly. I'm going to recommend that we don't fly the flag anymore. So that's an example of somebody who heard something that they never heard before that changed their position. So I think when I was answering the question before, I was thinking of the activists in the film who are not going to give up any ground and become more entrenched. But I actually think that folks who learn more about the history and don't have super strong feelings one way or another, actually positions did change.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Pat. And I know, Ira, you have your hand up, and then we saw Tina, Karen, and Bill in the chat. So Ira, if you'd like to go ahead with your question, please.
Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed that documentary. You guys did a great job. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
So one cogent argument from somebody who was supporting keeping the flag was when he pointed out that our flag, the American flag, represents racism and let me see what I wrote here.
He says slavery was brought in under that flag.
That's true too. Yeah.
And then we show that he mentions the Klan, the KKK marching through DC, and every flag you see is a U.S. flag. There's not a Confederate flag in there. Is that the sequence you're talking about?
That's right. And what we did to the Indians and what happened in Vietnam, et cetera, and that was all under the auspices of the American flag. Yet we can get beyond that. We can say, yeah, that was part of our heritage, but we acknowledge those wrongs, at least some of us do, and we can get beyond that. So I think some of the people who are supporting the flag kind of felt the same way. And it kind of made me think a little bit differently about the argument. And I was wondering how you guys felt about that.
I mean, I understand the argument. I think if I understand my sort of like rhetoric, well, it's like a slippery slope argument. Well, if we take this flag down and we apply the same criteria to everything else, we're gonna have to start taking everything down, which is, I think, the argument. And my reaction to that argument is always, well, that might very well happen. You know, you take every instance on its own merits, then we evaluate that. And one of the things that in 2015, when this argument began, like this argument's been going on in the South for a very long time. It's not the first time it's come up. But there was a fear I always heard from the pro-Confederate heritage folks, was like, if we let them take the flag, our monuments will be next. Well, they were right. The monuments were next. And now the argument could be, well, you've taken the monuments, and now what are you going to take? I don't know. You know, we're going to change all the street names in Mississippi. half the streets are named after Confederate generals. So, I mean, I understand the argument, and I don't know what the answer is, but it's, you know, the young man makes a good point. And the other thing about the American flag and America as an idea, if you've seen the film, you see at the end, I ask a question: do you think of yourself as a Mississippian or an American first? There are people who answered that question who aren't in the film, that, you know, because they just, for one reason or other, because they got cut from the film, who said neither. Who felt that the injustices that this country has inflicted on African Americans through the generations is so painful to them that they don't even really want to identify as Americans. So how you reckon with not just the South's history around racism and prejudice, you know, it's the entire country, you know, has some reckoning to do. And I think that's part of why things are kind of the way they are right now, is that reckoning is going to be very, very painful, or is very, very painful.
Yeah. And we want to recognize Bill asked the same question. Just center Bill in the chat, asked the question about that, the final scene,
and asked if you were surprised by the answers. The last two answers were poignant in combination. And Bill, we wanted to acknowledge you too. This was one of the questions that we posed to people in the conversation guide as well, because it also struck us. So, and Pat.
That question came up. I have a friend who's a writer who was staying with us for a couple of weeks, and he was around when we were editing it. And he asked the question. I mean, he was sort of like questioning the Mississippians, just like, don't they think of themselves as Americans? Because they're so focused on this Confederacy. And it just sort of, that when he asked that question, I thought that's actually a really good question, because as I'm from Illinois, I'm from Chicago originally. If you ask the average person from Illinois if they are an Illinoisan or an American first, they'd laugh at you. I think. I don't know anybody who has such pride in their Illinois roots that they would say, I'm an Illinoisan first and an American second. I've lived in California. Californians have a much stronger identity as Californians, but I don't think many of them would say I'm a Californian first and an American second. But in the South, in Mississippi, that identity is so strong and so deep that the folks who were on the Confederate side of the spectrum on the fight over the state flag would say, and you see it in the film, I'm a Mississippian first, or I'm a Southerner first. I understand it because I've spent so much time with them. I know where it comes from, but I couldn't answer that way in a million years. I don't think. I mean, Matt and Leslie, do you guys? You guys are both from Indiana. We've all lived in Indiana for a very long time too.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a Indianan first?
It's a Hoosier.
A Hoosier. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, I couldn't figure out what the equivalent was.
Yeah, and definitely not for me. In fact, I would call myself a human. You know, like first. You know, is how I would describe it when asked. Leslie, I'm not sure. Yeah, where you would go with that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to answer right now because I think it would be a gut response, and since I've been thinking about it in this conversation, I'm not sure. But I think I can say fairly confidently that I wouldn't have the same kind of pull towards being a Hoosier that a Mississippian may have about being from Mississippi.
Yeah, and I do, and we do love where we're from, you know, and do take a lot of pride in where we're from. But I don't think we think of it more as, like, I guess the French call it a terroir, of just a certain essence that you can't walk away from because you literally came out of the earth here, out of, you know, we were born here. And you can't hide from that fully, but at the same time, our identity isn't wrapped up in it, which is a separate thing.
It also might be that I moved away to go away to school when I was 18 or 19 years old and haven't lived in Illinois in a very long time. So maybe if I spent my whole life there, I'd feel differently, but maybe not.
Yeah.
I see a hand up over here. I'll let you guys direct the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill, I think is that your hand up?
You're on mute, Bill.
Very good.
I'm going to ask the question. I think that it's more complex than that, what you said, because the last answer was Sharon's. She said Mississippian.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was really poignant in my mind that was the answer. And the Republican politician said American. So, I mean, that was really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, what that goes to me is that no group is really a monolith.
Right.
You know, and I just think, you know, that's what makes this whole enterprise, you know, surprising and interesting. Yeah, Sharon vehemently, and she said, no, I'm a Mississippian first. She was not going to let, the way I take that is she's not letting anyone take that from her.
Right.
Warts and all, that she's a Mississippian.
And you know, the other person that I think answered the question that they were a Mississippian first was Lawrence Dennis. And I think that was not in the film.
Yeah, that we cut that in the previous version. Lawrence Dennis, the woman who designed the flag, said Mississippian first as well.
And be clear, you guys got to be clear for people who haven't seen the movie. She designed the new flag, the replacement flag.
No,
right?
she designed a different flag.
What flag? Right.
She was trying to design a state flag. She did design a state flag that was ultimately not adopted by the state. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lane.
And really fast, I think her reasoning for pulling away from that project, I thought was very courageous on her part. You know, once she realized, you know, how that could have an effect because of her grandfather's position on all of that, which was not her position.
But should I explain that a little bit for folks
Please.
who haven't seen the film?
Yes.
So in the film, when I started working on the film, I met a graphic designer named Lawrence Dennis up in Jackson, Mississippi. And she is the granddaughter of John C. Stennis, who was this long-serving U.S. senator from Mississippi, who was, he was basically a segregationist. And he's known in the state for that. And Lauren is a very progressive person, and she designed a state flag that she wanted to be the replacement flag, and it became known as the Stennis flag. So for several years, between 2015 up to 2018 or so, it seemed like if there was going to be a new flag in Mississippi, it was going to be the Stennis flag. And part of what people were drawn to was that the descendant, the granddaughter of a segregationist senator, had moved so far, away from that sort of position in the world that she was presenting a new flag for a new Mississippi, and people sort of got behind that. But after the George Floyd murder, there was this idea that we don't want the new state flag to have any connection to a segregationist senator, even though that wasn't Lauren's position at all. It was her grandfather's. So she was, in a way, paying the price for what her grandfather stood for. So she withdrew when she sort of understood what was happening and where the energy was going. She withdrew her flag from consideration, which is a huge thing for her.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat. I think we're going to take a couple more questions from Anne and Adine, and then we're going to transition, and we have a few questions for you all. So Anne, what is your question, please?
I have a comment and a question. So I noticed that whenever it's a national holiday, and where I live, they put out American flags, and I cringe. And because I'm so embarrassed about how our country shows up in the world, that it's hard for me to be proud of that flag. So that's my comment. My question is, I really hear that the people who had a position dug their heels in and were deeper into their position. I'm wondering, do you think that through the conversations that were had and the process, that they maybe could see each other's perspective in a different light, right? That I'm right, I know what I want, but I can hear you in a way that I never could hear you before. Do you think that happened?
I think in some cases it has. I can't point to any really specific instances where someone has said, I'm going to stop advocating for one thing or another. My experience of being in the audience and being with them, watching the film together, and my communication with them, over the last year or so, leads me to believe that they're all willing to kind of work together in a sense to promote the film, which to me signals that they're open to allowing this exchange of different positions. I'll tell you a really quick story. After that screening in Oxford last year, Sharon Brown, who's an African-American woman in the film, who was one of the leaders to take the flag down, met George Johnson, who is a white gentleman who was working really hard to keep that flag up. They met for the first time in person, and they found a connection in a different arena about prison reform. Sharon is heavily involved in trying to do prison reform work in Mississippi, and George agrees with her position on prison reform in the state. Now, I don't know if they've actually collaborated to do anything together, but that was a situation where they found a different issue where they were on the same page. And there was at least the possibility that they could step forward together and do something where they were working together. I don't think either positions on the flag change. And part of what happens is when the flag change happened, it sort of put to rest some of those arguments. A lot of people just have moved forward. So I get your question. I'm just not sure if I can point to a specific instance where, that process has changed their position on the flag. But like Matt and Leslie said earlier, just being with these people and talking and getting to know them, not as boogeymen or boogie women or adversaries,
right,
but as a fellow Mississippian that you can hug and touch and say, hey, we've all been through this thing together and let's move on. I feel a sense of that. But I don't want to overstate it.
Right. Thank you. And thank you for making the film. Thank you for, I just think it's brilliant.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I might add too that this is a long game, like this work that we're all doing here is a really, really long game. And that even just making the film and putting these things out there, even if it's just with the people that were activists, even if their change is just incremental, even if there's just a slight shift in the way that they think, or a slight shift in their energy, or meeting one more person that's on the other side of what you believe, that you can make even just a slight connection to. There's there's just that little bit, of movement. And I think that this film's brought together those people in a way that has created that movement and then created these conversations as well.
Yeah, and just creating a ripple effect. I think, I know for me personally, even, working with Pat, seeing the film and the combination of my life experience and the the work that we've done to create the conversation guide has even helped me then see some of my own family members in a new way. A new way in a sense of, maybe seeing something that they post online or something that they say when everybody's gathered together that would normally just enrage me or anger me. I can pause, hear them, be curious, ask, why do you feel that way? Why do you think that way? And there are a lot of times that there's still moments where I feel that initial rage and complete lack of understanding based on what I think is right and what I think is love and peace and seeing and hearing someone. But there have been small changes, and I can see even the smallest amount of change in them when they're interacting with me as well. Something that I don't see when they're interacting with some other people. And so in addition to the long game, it's the ripple effect. It's the taking even the conversation that we're having right now and anything that you feel with your perspective or what you're learning, and just applying that curiosity to conversations you have right after this, or later today, or tonight, or tomorrow. And I think that that's a part of it too. So,
and I want to quickly just acknowledge, it was Kim who just spoke, just what you said at the very beginning about that acknowledgement. That's a hard thing to admit, being, the shame, so this is a story about, a lot of collective shame and having a hard time accepting a symbol, that you're ashamed of or have a hard time with. That's such a hard thing to admit, and such a grounded place to start, a conversation. So thank you for saying that and being able to voice that.
yeah.
One last thing I want to just add is that this conversation that we're having is the model for conversations on all kinds of topics, right? There are so many things where people are so positioned, and I just think this is a beautiful model. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for saying that, because the parallels between what's happening in Mississippi and the symbols that are happening, the parallel essence of these conversations and these battles that are happening over access to power and and preserving people's history it's all over. Yeah, and we can learn from these conversations. Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. I know we'll do one more question from Adine, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this. Patrick, I want to say I was born and raised in Chicago. And as an African-American of a certain age, I'm sure that we grew up in different Chicagos. I always described Chicago as a northern southern city. There was much of Chicago in the 40s and the 50s and even the 60s that paralleled Mississippi. So identity does shape your experience.
Can I ask you to clarify what you mean by, I don't know if you just said the word, mirrors Mississippi in a way, where you're talking about that period of time. In what way?
Oh,
I know the migration of folks moving up north.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm from the south side of Chicago originally.
All right. I was from the south side of Chicago, where my folks could not buy a house. And when they were able to get a white college friend to buy the house for them, all the whites left the neighborhood. So rigid housing segregation, school segregation, except for those of us who were fortunate enough to go to private school. And only one private school accepted Black students at the University of Chicago for a long time. So just rigid segregation. And it was pretty ugly.
Yeah.
So I'm sure things have improved a bit now, but it was like a northern southern city.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. That's one of the elements that I came across frequently talking to the pro-Confederate folks here in Mississippi, was they had this, and you feel it from, if you've seen the film George Johnson, there's this feeling that the South and Mississippi being like a center of the Confederacy bears all the historical weight of racism and prejudice. And I feel that with them. I know what they're talking about, because I grew up in Chicago, just feeling like, I was part of the side that won the Civil War. Our people were the best people. We won because we were morally right. And, some of that's true. A lot of it's not. But the North has a great deal to answer for.
Oh, yes.
And the South is tired of being the group of people who get blamed for all of it. And I understand that. So what you're saying resonates with me, and it would resonate with a lot of people in this film who would say, yeah, you're right. It wasn't just us. It wasn't just during the Civil War.
Yeah, and it wasn't just then. They're right. The other thing I wanted to say is, do you think the Southern defensiveness is in some way related to the fact that they understand that they are reviled by so many people?
Yeah, I wouldn't use, they might feel like they are reviled. I wouldn't necessarily use that particular word. I think part of it comes from the fact that they lost.
Okay.
And it's a wound. Whereas the people in the North, I'm just sort of like being facetious here, but I grew up thinking, hey, we won, just move on. The good guys won, and that's all we need to be thinking about. But people in the South have this wound that they lost, and they think that they lost unfairly, and then they feel like they've been blamed for everything about the race issues in this country. And I, you know, and like George says in the film, I'm tired of being, you know, just because I have a draw, people think I'm an idiot.
Mhm.
You know, and I think that definitely is a thing around here.
Mhm.
That, you know, not with everybody, but there are folks who feel like they just don't get taken seriously.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's an element of it for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to ask you all some questions.
Yeah. So
That's
good.
okay.
Yeah, and we'll just like quickly read a little passage from our gathering guide, which we do encourage everyone to check out before they watch the film and after they watch the film. That questions, we believe that questions open a shared path of discovery. The right questions are a beautiful invitation to someone's perspective in order to gain a deeper knowledge of their life experience by adding nuance to the stories we've told ourselves about who they are. These questions were designed as starting points for self-reflection and conversation, not political statements where it's obvious who will agree or disagree. Navigating and living into these questions will be difficult and sometimes messy, but this work is necessary to create space for individuals to be seen and heard. And you know, seeing yourself even in the things that you say. So we can pose this question and see if anybody has anything to share.
Yeah, so the first question, and if you would like to share an answer or thoughts, if you could use the raise hand feature so we can see those come up instead of using the chat for this section, that would be great. I wanted to go ahead and ask the question to you all, since it's something that we'd talked about a little bit earlier, which was the burning of the Confederate flag. So the question here is this: Confederate flags are burned twice in the film, at the Jefferson Davis Monument protest in New Orleans and later at the Mississippi State Capitol. How did you respond to each moment? How did these two responses differ for you, if at all? How did you feel about Sharon Brown's conflicted response to the burning of the Confederate flag?
Does anybody
And thank you. I'm going to interrupt. Keep in mind, people, we have 20 minutes for this conversation, so that if you do have comments or answers, just keep in mind that we have 20 minutes for the whole rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Can I also add something? I'm not very good at this process, and I just looked at the chat, and I think there are more questions in there. If we don't get to them in here, I will try to answer them offline somehow. Because I just saw a question that I think is an important one that I just want to make sure that person, you know, gets an answer.
Okay.
If that's possible.
Of course.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like Adelaide and then Leah.
Hi. The feeling that I got from watching that film and those flag burnings brought me back to book burnings and what that meant. I felt the same way Ms. Brown felt at the very end, or almost the end of it, the film, when she kind of walks away from it. It's not a good feeling.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then Leah.
I only really remember the last one, I think, but
Can I refresh your memory what the first one was?
sure.
So at that very chaotic scene at Davis Monument where George hits somebody with the flag, he gets arrested. A woman holds up a small flag and lights it on fire and says, "F your Confederacy." And it's a brief moment, but it's her expression of anger and frustration at it. It's a brief moment.
Yeah, I probably felt good about that one. And the last one, when the African-American woman walked away in sadness, I definitely felt that, for me, that's the difference between the right and the left, is the left feels empathy for the burning of someone else's flag. That it's sad that it has to be that way. So thank you.
Thank you, Leah. And Tina.
Yeah, I mean, I watched it both, especially the first one, the Jefferson Davis Monument. I mean, that was what just, my stomach was in knots. I mean, just the rage on both sides. It just felt like, wow. I mean, I was frustrated at people just going after each other and escalating it, and nothing, it felt like nothing positive. Both sides were being wrong at that point. It reminded me of, I know a story I heard about someone saying they were watching the sound off on TV and switching the channels and watching like people on this, I don't know, a congressional hearing and then Greenpeace and Ku Klux Klan, and with the sound off, he said they all had the same angry faces, and and the anger was unanimous, and it just really did. This is the problem here, folks.
Can I tell you a real quick story about that particular scene at the Davis Monument? When we had the screening up in Oxford last year, a lot of us all stayed in the same hotel up there, including Sharon and a bunch of other folks. And the morning after the screening, I was down in the lobby getting a cup of coffee, and Sharon was down there. And we were talking, and I said, so Sharon, what'd you make of that last night? Just to get her take on it. And one of the first things she said was, man, they did George wrong in New Orleans. She saw that scene as George being the person who was I don't know if the word is mistreated, but she recognized that he was there and he was trying to diffuse the situation in his own way by going to the police saying this is going to get out of hand. And in that scene, they rolled the window up on him. Her reaction to that scene was George tried to do the right thing and the New Orleans police just shut him off. Which to me is another kind of remarkable thing about Sharon, is that she sees things that way. I just wanted to add that to the story.
And I think even what happens directly after that then is George goes up, he says, see, they're rolling their windows up on me. And he walks down to another police car, walks up to the window and demands to see the police officers, to hear his name and badge number, because he's like, it's my right as a citizen. And to me, I can't imagine, I mean, a white man walking up to a police car and demanding to see that, that's then right after that an example of, his privilege to feel like he could go up to an authority figure like that and demand to see that and be able to then just get the window rolled up on him and walk away. So, it's such a complex scene there where so many things are happening, or a way where it can be relatable, and then a way where you can also see deeper things. And that was like one of my takeaways from that as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Tina. I think looking at the clock, we have about 10 more minutes. So I think we'll do one more question to you all. And then Pat, if you wanted to address one of the questions you saw in the comments.
Okay.
When Lane, we can turn it back over to you. The question that we had is about symbols. And in the film, Pat says that the Confederate flag was literally woven into Mississippi's identity. So our question to you is, what symbols do you feel represent you or have become a part of your identity because of where you were born or what your ancestors experienced? And if maybe there isn't something that comes to mind, conversely, what symbols have you adopted based on your lifestyle preferences or other places that you've lived or been to? Okay. Saya?
Actually, something Ann said reminded me or encouraged me to share. I have a new next door neighbor a year or two ago, and immediately, clearly someone who thinks differently than I do. And that was at the time of the last election. And he put out a sign saying, my governor is an idiot. And I've never been anyone who ever put a decal on my car, ever, ever, ever. And that year, by the way, I did not put out a yard sign, which I normally would have afterwards, but his was out way earlier. And so I thought about it and thought about how can I stand up for things. And I feel the same way about the American flag, that it's been stolen really by those who want to hide their deeds behind the American flag sometimes. So I found a sticker that said, a decal that said, it was the Michigan flag, or excuse, it was an outline of Michigan over the lines of an American flag showing through. And then I put a UN symbol in another corner and an Earth picture on another corner. And I thought, now figure it out, you know, just wanting to remind people or make them think or puzzle over it, because it just hurt. It just hurt to think that they're taking the flag away from what it was intended to mean, from what it really has become.
Mm-hmm. I also have another friend who says that more progressive, liberal-minded folks ought to start flying the American flag and trying to take it back in a way. And I think it's an interesting idea. If one sort of political party and one wing is able to make the claim that they are actually Americans and everybody else is not, that's going to be a difficult situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else, I saw in the comments that I read said the peace sign was an important symbol for you when you were younger. Does anyone else have any symbols that they've identified with or that they feel represent them now? No. And we'd love to hear your thoughts too after this conversation, if something comes to mind. And if you download the conversation guide, we also have writing prompts. So those are questions for self-reflection and later having conversation with other people if you would like to. So we highly encourage you to look through those and write down any thoughts that you have. And if you feel comfortable sharing those with us, we would love to connect after this conversation as well.
Kelly has her hand up.
Oh,
Kelly.
Thank you so much. I see it now. Yeah.
Yeah. You're on mute.
Double
there you go.
muted here, muted at the mic and muted on the button. When you have a barky dog, you take precautions. So what I wanted to say in response to that question is that I feel like whether you call it a flag or a logo, what we're really doing is we want to label ourselves. And the reason we need a label is because we need to find our tribe, right? We want to have some kind of a, for lack of a better word, an advertisement that lets other people know I'm like you, you're like me, we have the same ideas. And the problem that comes when you do that is that because we have this one symbol in common, now we start to assume that we have all of our ideas and positions in common. And not just with people who are like us, but we start to assume that people who might subscribe to a different belief system based on their symbol now subscribe to all different belief systems than we do. So I think the danger comes in those assumptions. And that's why these forums are phenomenal, because we are talking about how to go up to a person in a room, in a situation, at a gathering, on a Zoom screen that we know believes passionately differently than we do on whatever topic it is we're here to discuss, having that conversation, and then having it open enough to find out maybe some things that we have in common. And sometimes if you can start out with the commonality, that's great, right? This thing that we agree on, but we don't always have that opportunity. And so teaching people how to talk across that divide that they already know exists in a way where you're coming from a place of curiosity. You don't have an agenda, right? I'm not trying to change how you feel about it. I just want to share how I feel so that you understand. And then I'm going to give you the same opportunity. And maybe at a minimum, we'll at least have some tolerance for one another and some respect for how we arrived at that position, because we're able to share the experience that brought us there. So I might still not agree with you, but I might respect you for your position and where you're coming from.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you so much. I think, Pat, if you wanted to, we've got it looks like about maybe 3 to 4 minutes for
Yeah.
the question you saw.
Right. Well, I just popped the chat thing open, and the first question that I saw is something that I wrestled with, with my editor for a very long time, and I'm not sure I land in the right spot. But the question is from Gretchen Young, if I'm pronouncing that right. Oh, it's a direct message. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm not supposed to read this out loud. What do you think? Should I read it out loud?
Let's ask Gretchen.
Go ahead,
Gretchen.
Patrick.
I'm
If
sorry,
you're
Gretchen.
good with it, I'm good with it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So she says, Patrick, I heard you say, quote, the film was like dropping a bomb in the room, end quote. Considering the images at the beginning and end of the film of the murder of African Americans, did you think about how the shrapnel from the bomb would more heavily impact the African American people watching the film? So the short answer to that, Gretchen, is yes. I thought about that a lot. The reason why I decided to keep it in the film, and for those of you who have not seen the film, I don't really want to give away too much, but it's sort of bookended in a way with the murders at Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina and George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. And we sort of treat these visually and with audio in a way that it is intentionally jarring and upsetting. And Gretchen is asking the question, is it, I don't know if it's the right way to say it, but is it fair to do that when African Americans will be watching the film, because it may impact them, more than other folks watching it? And I agree that it likely does. For me, it was really important that whoever is watching the film had the strongest visceral way that we could get people to feel what was happening at that time in the past. And when I was making this film, a lot of people forgot who Dylann Roof was. They'd forgotten the sort of whole episode. The memory was people were killed in the church and it was awful, but the specificity of that young man and his attraction to the Confederacy and Confederate symbols, I felt it was important that we sort of had to live that again in a way. And at the end with the murder of George Floyd, that cell phone video is about 8.5, 9 minutes long. We show about a second of it, very briefly, and then we hear the audio. So it's still very troubling. But in answer to that, I consulted in a way with several African-American filmmaker friends of mine and people that I would share I'd share cuts of the film with, and would sort of check the temperature. Like, is this too much? And I just got the sense that it was like, it's difficult, but it's not so much that I won't watch the film. Although I will say that I know people who have not watched any of that footage because they just don't want to subject themselves to it. So the answer is I struggled a lot with how to handle that stuff, and whether or not I land in the right spot, I don't know, but it wasn't a casual decision.
Yeah, and that's been the center of a lot of our conversations, is how can we do everything we can do to inform people ahead of time, what the weight of what they're about to witness, and to think about that and take care of yourself. By either not watching the film or going into it. We've like had a ton of conversations about how do we make sure that everybody knows, Lane, we had a couple conversations prior to this where we had that conversation just to make sure that we're letting people know that to ease into this, if at all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we have any other questions. It looks like it's about time too. So Lane, we'll hand it back over to you and Eugene.
Thank you so very much. So I have a question for the three of you. How can people reach you reach out to you if they are interested in hosting their own conversations about this film? And then also let me ask that question first, get the answer to that. How can people reach you if they are interested in hosting their own conversations about the film?
Yeah, so I will actually share a link in the chat. On the website, there's a host a screening page, and so you can submit a request there, or our email address is in the chat now. It's outreach@elemental.vision, and you can send us a message to have a conversation about setting something up, or any other questions or thoughts that you may have.
Mm-hmm. And we every time we have a conversation like this, or we're involved in it, we learn something, and we value and look forward to people's feedback. And through the website and our social channels, your feedback is welcome, especially for those of you that haven't had a chance to watch the film, that have questions. Engage with us. It's how we learn. It's how we grow. It's how we expand. It's how when you know better, you do better. And the more times that we have these conversations, the more we'll learn from you all. So please let us know, what we're doing right and what we're missing the mark on.
And then the last question, which is one of our, questions that Lainey and I tend to ask all of the guests. What is your call to action? How would you like people to get involved?
Yeah, thank you. So we have a few things. So the first one will be to reach out to us if you would like to host a screening or have thoughts or questions. And then most importantly is just continuing to do this work of having difficult conversations and having real conversations, and doing the work on yourself to be able to be in that space and hold space with people. And we'll share a link to the conversation guide and the gathering guide, and we invite you to go through those to start and use those as reference, share them, put them to use, and that would be a great call to action. And then the other two things are share the film, watch the film with anyone that you think would want to see it. I'll share a link here. You can watch it on Google Play, YouTube, Apple TV, and iTunes. And then if you'd like to follow along on social media, we'll share links to the Instagram and Facebook pages.
We have a Twitter account, but nothing happens there. Usually what happens is I tweet something and my wife likes it, and that's the end of the day. We're done. Haven't mastered Twitter yet.
Yeah,
it's true.
But as Leslie said too, is the most important call to action for us is we believe that liberation is never one way, and y'all have been our chosen family for this time, and we love you, and we want you all to just keep thinking, keep reaching out, keep doing the work that you're doing individually, and we feel you, we see you, we hope you feel and see us, and we're all in this together, and we love you for what you're doing and for showing up. Just keep showing up.
I want to say thank you all for coming. Thank you, Lane and Eugene, for inviting us. Thank you, Matt and Leslie, for helping facilitate this. It means a lot to be here.
Yes, thank you all.
Well, thank you. I want to say thank you to our guests, Patrick O'Connor, Leslie Eades, and Matt Wagner. And again, so the link is in the chat. If you have not watched the movie, you can still do this until, I believe, well, from what my notes here say, you can do this until 9 p.m. Eastern time this evening. But there's a link in the chat, so I'm figuring that that's still going to work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's 7 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, and that's for this audience. You can watch the film any time on YouTube and Google Play and Apple, the Apple platforms. It's just at that point you're streaming it and paying for it. Yeah. Okay. But it's available for this audience for free until
I think 7 Eastern. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lane.
So So I thank you. I'm just gonna put the actual link, the free link in the chat right now. That one's the one that's good until 7 Eastern. Thank you so much. Very exciting that you guys are here. Very exciting that you're, sharing this film with us. Very exciting that you all showed up. And we really, really hope that you enjoyed your time together with us. We hope that you guys will come back for more great conversations. Please do share our platform. We really appreciate your love and support as well. Everybody, we hope that you have enjoyed this latest series of Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. We're going to return on June 11th with another 8 sessions. We do look forward to receiving your feedback on this series and suggestions for speakers and topics. Please email your comments and suggestions to info@racetalkrevolution.com. If you'd like to support our programming, you can donate directly on the Race Talk Revolution website. Our next What is Ours to Do workshop is coming up on Saturday, May 21st from 12 to 6 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific. You guys got me all turned around with this Central thing. What is Ours to Do? Creating Safe Spaces to Grow Beyond Racism is a one-day anti-racism online workshop that's going to provide tools to help you have difficult conversations regarding race in your families and your communities and your organizations, and for healing the wounds of racial oppression that keep us from coming together as human beings. And you're also going to emerge with a deepened connection to your humanity and your personal call to action, and we can promise that. You can register by going to the events page on our website at racetalkrevolution.com/events. The cost is $99 and registration is capped at 22 people. We are also actively seeking faith-based organizations interested in anti-racist organizing and or creating multiracial worship communities. So please let us know if you're interested in having us work with your spiritual community or congregation. Again, we are at racetalkrevolution.com. We love you all. Leslie Eades, Matt Wagner, Patrick O'Connor, thank you so much for being here. Eugene, please close us out, my love.
Mm-hmm. So as we like to let everybody know, and as we like to remind you, have conversations with people who may not believe the same way as you do, or who may not look like you do. One of the ways of doing that, and this takes courage, is when you're out to lunch and you see somebody sitting by themselves, go up and ask if you can sit and join them. Have a conversation. Love you guys. Have a wonderful, wonderful time off, and we'll see you shortly.
Thanks again, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody. Take care. Be safe.